Good afternoon and welcome to Soteria. This video is part one of a series that we're going to be doing about prepared citizen gear setups. Today we're mainly going to be discussing methodologies of fighting and how that'll affect your gear. There's a lot of information online. There's a lot of stuff to comb through. It can be pretty overwhelming, especially if you're just getting into it. So today we're going to be diving into a bit of an overview of all of these types of gear and kind of giving you the 30,000 foot view so you can kind of decide for yourself what the next steps that you need to take, what gear you need to get. We're not going to tell you what to buy, but we're going to tell you kind of what the options are and the different methodologies so you can choose what is right for your situation. Today I have with me my buddy Nigel, and he is a prior Marine. He's going to help us kind of dive into this and break it down a little bit. He has a lot of experience in a lot of different areas, so go ahead and tell us kind of what your background is.
Of course. So I spent 5 years in the Marine Corps Infantry. I spent about a year total training, and then I spent 2 years in a fleet anti-terror security team before I moved into a light armored reconnaissance battalion. After that, I spent 3.5 years working federal security in a city. And finally now I've been working with a lot of local guys as well as people from around my state and even around the Midwest and training the skills that I've learned as well as learning the skills that they've learned from their own backgrounds.
So first, in your opinion, what I want to dive into is what is a prepared citizen? What is a Minuteman to you?
So to me, a prepared citizen is someone who spent the time to learn the skills, study the knowledge, and develop the mindset of being ready for when things start to go down in the worst kinds of ways. It's not someone who's actively seeking those kind of worst ways when, say, shit hits the fan, stuff like that, but it's people who are ready for it. Take Ukraine, for example. In Ukraine, they had pretty strict firearms laws before the Russian invasion. The most of what you would see are anything that were smuggled or the black market from when the Soviet Union collapsed, and some private ownership, which you could see just in the days before they started preparing for this Russian invasion, but a lot of people didn't really expect it to happen until it did. What's nice about being in the United States is that we do have the Second Amendment, which allows us to be proactive rather than reactive.
Right.
Whereas the Ukrainians, they didn't have that option. There's plenty of pictures out there you can see of just before the invasions, a lot of Ukrainian civilians using wooden AKs for drills. So it's one thing to have an armed civilian population that's willing to fight, but it's an even better thing to have an armed civilian population that actually knows how to fight. Right. Having a trained civilian populace is going to be way better than a force that is willing but is untrained, even if it's double the numbers of the force that's actually trained, just because it's the quantity versus quality argument that we've always seen throughout history. And in my opinion, I believe that the quality of the individual is going to be much, much greater than the quantity that you're going to get.
Right, and that goes right along with my philosophy, which is, as a man, if you have the capability and you have the resources, especially in the US, we have the freedoms, we have the resources and the ability to get that training, to get that gear, and to do the things, practice before anything, even during peacetime, and hopefully we have peacetime for a very long time. But if you have the ability to do it ahead, why not? Because there's so many men who you will ask them, hey, would you step up if the need arose? If bad guys came to your town and started going door to door and killing and raping people, would you step up? And they say, oh yeah, I'd show them, I'd step up to the plate. Okay, great. So, well, how do you know you could actually perform? How do you know you wouldn't just get shot in the back? Do you even know if your firearm functions? Do you know how to fist fight? Do you even have the food and water to last those first 2 weeks when those bad guys show up and the supply lines get cut off? So this is stuff that I think that is pretty essential, not because we need it now, because it is almost in some ways a deterrent. If you know that you have a nation full of people that are ready, willing, and able to fight, then it's kind of an extra step where a lot of bad actors are less likely and less willing to try things, you know?
Yep, I absolutely agree. Having that prepared citizen population that knows how to fight, their equipment works, they know what they need, you have deterrence from other countries or other bad actors within the area, because they know that anything that they try, there's a good chance it might get stopped by a good Samaritan who is just ready and willing to act.
All right, so Nigel, what would you say that is the goal of the prepared citizen?
So I would say the goal of the prepared citizen is to, just starting out, start learning the skills. It can be as simple as bushcraft, water procurement, growing food, knowing how to hunt. That way you can sustain yourself and your family and the people around you, and then you can start building up those skills, basic marksmanship, fitness, starting to put your gear together, learning the difference between cover and concealment, learning proper concealment, and then you can really start building up on what kind of equipment you want to carry. Like, what have I started to develop as a skill set? How can I purchase gear that is not only going to make that skill set a little bit easier to do, but also expand my capabilities? Something that I like to do is just having a general purpose kit that can flex into different roles, because I have a lot of experience in a lot of different things. My personal goal going forward is just taking what I've learned over my 5 years in the Marine Corps. I've been doing security work, and from all the training I've done as a civilian, along with all the things I've learned from other people I've trained with, and bringing it all together and start teaching it the best that I can. I don't know everything, so that's why I'll never ever say that I have all the answers, and I'll try to reference other people the best I can.
So if you start kind of diving down the rabbit hole of the prepared citizen or the prepper, the Minuteman, whatever side of the internet, you're going to get a lot of people telling you what you should and shouldn't do. Now, I'm not here to tell you any of that information is bad or good, but there is something that I do highly recommend that you start with, and that is to think about what your area of operation is, your immediate surrounding area, and how that would affect your gear. Because before you just start spending hundreds, if not thousands of dollars on random stuff that a YouTuber told you to buy, you should do a little research for yourself, and you should spend some time thinking, writing down in a notebook, what kinds of situations would you respond to? What situations would you stay at home? And how is that going to affect what you buy? Because it's always better to start buying with a plan than to just start buying willy-nilly, in my opinion. What do you have to say on this?
So what I have to say is, I'll use myself as an example. My AO, where I live, is the driftless area of the Midwest. So I have a lot of hills, there's a lot of farms, and there's also a lot of, like, a mixture of bigger cities to smaller villages. So I've come to tailor my equipment towards being pretty general purpose, but I also kind of lean more towards the reconnaissance side of things, just from my experience in being in a light armored reconnaissance battalion as a scout. But if I was going to be fighting in my AO, it's gonna look kind of similar to what we're seeing in Ukraine, where there's a lot of farmland that they're fighting over. And of course, the wood blocks haven't been blown out around here, and the capabilities of others to do such a thing is slim to none, unless I'm going against a very, very advanced enemy group. However, it's not something I'm terribly worried about. Now, for that, I like to wear a lot of scrim on my kit. There's a lot of forest, either dead vegetation or live vegetation, as well as like a Cobra hood or a Viper hood. I like to scrim my packs. I like to scrim a lot of my equipment, but not over the top scrim where you end up impeding the function of your gear and your rifle, which I'm certain we've all seen before. Like, there's been people who over scrim their rifle and now their ejection port won't open all the way. A big thing too is to make sure that you're balancing your sustainment and your weight. So speed can be your security, and your ability to remain mobile and yet sustain yourself for a long period of time is going to be very important, especially as someone like us as a civilian. We don't have the big logistics networks like the United States does when they go into a country and establish a Burger King in the first 48 hours. We don't have that. Granted, you might have a decent logistics network with friends, families, maybe you know a local farmer that's willing to give you some supplies, which is great and all, but again, those longer missions when you're out in the field, you are going to have to balance mission essential equipment, you have to balance your sustainment equipment such as food, water, medicine, your own ammo, and anything else that you need to ensure mission success. So my AO consists of a lot of farmers and hunters. So I can be as overt as I'd like, but if I'm doing a reconnaissance mission near a farmer's farm and he sees me in all my nice kit in his wood line, it's going to be a very quick way to catch a 243 or a 7mm round to the face, because he's just going to see an armed man in his wood line and he's going to shoot and ask questions later. Contrary to popular belief, mostly by fat people who think that having a chest rig will make them more agile, I do wear armor for most of my stuff just because that's what I'm used to. If my Met TC determines that contact is likely or it's even possible, I'm going to wear armor. However, if I'm going to be in a more of a observation post role, ideally further away from where the fight's going to be, and all I'm doing is just observing and reporting, I might opt for a chest rig. So keep in mind also as well, with the increasing usage of drones, not only can the munition of the drone produce shrapnel, but your environment will also become shrapnel. And we've seen it in all the videos in Ukraine where even a near miss can still produce casualties. Rocks, trees, everything can become shrapnel and cause a potentially fatal wound, which is why I'm a big fan of wearing armor for whatever I do. Something else to also look at is how much am I actually able to carry on my chest rig as compared to a plate carrier. You have that cummerbund that comes all the way around, whereas chest rigs usually stop about here. That can really reduce how much you're carrying. Are you wearing a belt with your kit? So that's something to really look at. How much are you realistically going to carry? How much weight are you willing to actually carry for those long distance movements?
As with anything, the big thing with this gear is you really have to kind of try it, and you have to go out and see, because maybe you are not in a place physically where you can operate for many hours with armor, or maybe you want to get your fitness up to a level where you can have a 70-pound ruck and you can go for 3 days like that. Really, you are not going to know until you get out there and you actually move around and do it and spend extended time in kit. So it's really, I think, valuable if you have friends who have kit, or if you have some way ability to practice or to try things before you buy. It's going to be a huge asset. Even as simple as, I guarantee you have a backpack. I guarantee you have some kind of hiking backpack or something, loaded up with weight. Just go walk around for a day or two. You know, the wife will forgive you. You'll be back some point. Bring lots of water. Make sure you change your socks and have a good time. And it'll give you a good idea of what you're capable of. And I think camping also, it helps you get to know your AO. Primitive camping is great because it helps you get to know your AO. It helps you understand your environment. It helps you understand what you need to sustain yourself. And in terms of rain gear, food, how easy it is to make a fire, how easy to procure the stuff that you need to make a fire, where's water, and all that stuff. So make sure you do stuff. That's what I'm trying to say here, is go out and do stuff, because it's going to help you understand your environment and what you need as a result of your environment. So now I kind of want to get into the different methodologies of fighting and warfare, and different people are comfortable with different types of warfare, right? The kind of warfare that I'm personally comfortable with is defending my family, defending my loved ones, defending my church, defending my immediate community in any means necessary from someone who is threatening it. So that could look like just a self-defense shooting with a handgun, or it could look like area defense, mobile defense with full kit, So it's important to understand the different types of warfare. So kind of first we have conventional warfare, which this comes from Christopher Larson. His YouTube channel is a very good resource for a lot of military doctrine and knowledge, but he describes conventional warfare as control through force and none shall pass. So basically, this is the US military, right? We show up in force and we say, hey, we're here, we're the boss in town, we're gonna control everything, we've got the logistics, we can lock down an area, we have fire superiority. And none shall pass. Once they block off an area, nobody's getting through, or at least that's what they attempt, right? So what do you have to speak on this?
So for me, with that kind of conventional warfare, being from the Marine Corps, it's something that I got really familiar with. My first unit, our entire job as a fleet anti-terror security team was to go reinforce an embassy or like the ambassador's residence or any other kind of U.S. government facility that could potentially have nothing around it. Like it's not in a city, it's in a rural area. So for that, we were very, very adamant on ensuring that everyone carried all the equipment that they needed, but we wanted to lock down those areas. It was roving posts, stationary posts, a DM, some machine gun posts, and then we'd also send out security patrols from that area. And we would come in, security area, and then turn that into our base of operations for however long we needed. Or another thing that we did in the embassy in Madrid was we reacted as if we had just shown up and there was a complex attack on the area. My specific experience with that was moving civilians down to a safe area, and by the time I got back to my team, they were almost overrun with our enemy role players, and they had already finished the engagement a couple minutes before I even got in there, but because I got there at the same time as an evaluator, he decided to say that an S-vest went off and we were all dead, so I just took a nap for the rest of the time.
When Op 4 has a little bit too much fun, too good at their job.
Exactly. And even speaking on the Op 4 side of things, since we would use other platoons as Op 4, it's being on the other side of it is pretty interesting to see, because if you're trying to breach that wire quietly, or if you're trying to mount a complex attack against something like that, you have to be ready for the fact that they've prepared that defense long in advance before they even showed up. They have the intelligence, they know the area just from maps and pictures from the ground. They're going to have a in-depth defense ready for you. So going more into that conventional style of fighting, you're going to have not only that logistics network, but you're also going to have supporting units as well as like dedicated medical units. So someone gets hurt, you can pull them off the line and bring them to that medical unit, and they're going to get a full surgery if they need it, maybe even an amputation. On top of that, you're also going to have your own reconnaissance elements. You're going to have transportation, supporting fires, resupply. It's not going to be a whole lot that you have to worry about unless situations become really dire. Something that you could potentially see where your own personal kit and how you have it set up could become applicable to something in a conventional fight is, let's look at Ukraine, where a lot of these civilians were drafted to go fight against the Russians, and they might have been issued some kit, but some people might have brought their own. For example, we can look at foreign volunteers bringing a lot of their own kit and equipment because they already know what they like as opposed to what would be issued to them. So that could make a pretty big difference between having stuff that you already know and you're familiar with as opposed to being handed something that they can just afford to give you, and it might not be the greatest quality.
Yeah, and you can see a lot of these guys doing like these GoFundMes and stuff because they're just desperate to get something off of Amazon or whatever they can get to replace like the 60-year-old weapon system and you know, line gear that they've been given. So okay, so the next we got insurgents. So insurgents are radically different from like a conventional force. And again, from Christopher Larson's YouTube channel, former Army leadership, he's done a lot of stuff, kind of runs One Shepherd. And for insurgents, he says that they have a methodology of no blood for land, and they have hit and run harassment tactics. No blood for land basically means that you are there to make your presence known to the force that is controlling the region, but you are not willing to die for a plot of land, right? So say you live in Wisconsin, you're defending Wisconsin, that there's a force controlling Wisconsin, you're Your job is to make the force that is controlling Wisconsin feel unstable and scared, but you're not going to necessarily die on a specific hill and say, this is my hill, I'm not going to let you come past here, and then you just die there, right? So no blood for land and hit and run tactics. So hit and run tactics are pretty self-explanatory. This is kind of what you see with the Taliban and stuff. At face value, they seem ineffective, but if you kind of study history and kind of our history in the Middle East, you'll realize they are a little bit more effective than people give it credit for. You know, you basically are just to kind of harass them, get some casualties if possible, and just get out of there as fast as possible. You often will be emerging from the civilian population and disappearing into the civilian population. So what do you have to say about insurgent tactics?
So for insurgent tactics, I agree with a lot of what he just said. It's going to be a lot of these hit and run tactics where you're going to blend back into the civilian population as soon as possible, and you're not willing to die for a plot of land, which is, for an insurgency, is a good idea because you have the freedom of movement by being able to blend into the civilian population. Another way to look at it is almost like an offensive gray man theory, where you have these minimal things to complete your mission, which everyone talks about gray man, it's just what your everyday carry is to respond to a situation. But now in an offensive gray man, which this insurgency would kind of be like, you might have just your everyday carry, but you might also have a couple additional things to complete your mission and then disappear like you were never there and no one would know who it was. Another thing to look at as well is what kind of populace are you going to be trying to blend into and what you can get away with. For example, if you're living in a city or a town, you might not be able to get away with what you'd be able to in, say, like a small village that has a lot of hunters or just a rural area. If I lived in a small town, and like somewhere in Wisconsin or a rural area, I'd probably be able to get away with a pair of camouflage pants and like a Green Bay Packers hoodie and a baseball cap and have a high-powered rifle in the truck. No one would look twice. But if I lived in a city, I'd probably want to opt for something else. And the reason why that is you need to understand the populace around you. There's different subcultures within different styles of living. Farmers are very traditional. They're going to wear what they can work in, and they're going to be very, very minimal on what they're carrying, whereas someone in a city, they're going to be a little bit more busy, they want to be comfortable, so they're going to be probably carrying something in a bag as well, which you could absolutely use. Going forward with that as well, with the insurgency topic, is knowing all the kind of the key areas where you would think that a occupying force would be, trying to avoid those areas while whittling away everything else. Your job is to make that occupying force feel like they're going to be there forever. You want to kill their morale. You want them to make it feel like, why am I even here? That morale killer is not only going to stay there, but it's going to go back home with them. For example, if you look at Ukraine with all the Russian casualties and whatnot, there's a lot of people in Russia and even in Ukraine as well, like, why are we even here? We're just losing a lot of our own countrymen. Like, there's no point in this, blah, blah, blah. At the end of the day, it's inflicting those casualties or hitting those objectives and then disappearing that makes them feel that way. So with these insurgency tactics, you also can't afford to be up close and personal with the enemy just because that greatly increases the risk of producing casualties against yourself. So you're going to want to start looking at more longer range options, which is where those rural areas and farmers and even smaller hunting villages and whatnot have those high-powered rifles. Like, I've seen hunters in my local area with what looked like an M110K1 and a Night Force optic on it, and he uses it for whitetail hunting. It's strange, it's not common, but again, you could also get away with something like an old bolt action chambered in a good round. As long as you have a good load, a good optic, and you know what you're doing, you're going to be able to inflict those casualties from range and then disappear before they can respond. Especially in these more wide open areas and wood blocks and whatnot, you're going to have sight lines over these farms that could stretch for close to 1 kilometer or more. And it's really going to give you that standoff that you would need from an enemy force.
All right, and then the third methodology of warfighting, I guess, would be guerrilla. And a guerrilla is similar to an insurgency in some sense, and similar to a conventional force in some sense. And this is basically characterized as eventual control through controlled battle positions. A guerrilla force wants to be a conventional fighting force, but they might not have the numbers, they might not have the firepower or the propaganda, the control over the region. They are trying to gain control over a region through setting up these controlled battle positions, these complex battle positions. So you could think of a lot of ambush tactics because they know that this conventional force comes through here in certain times, in certain places, in certain ways. Now they're going to set up, they have the manpower, they have a little bit more of the firepower, say that they set up explosives and IEDs in all these different locations. They can afford to actually set up an effective ambush because they have more than 3 guys. They actually have decent numbers. They might have access to mortars, rockets, stuff like that. And what that does is it enables them to fight a little bit more like a conventional force, but they have to be very cautious and they have to be very choosy about their battles, because if they just random confront a conventional force head on, they're still going to lose, right? You know, this could apply to us in some ways, I think. It really depends on the context. But what do you have to say on guerrilla tactics?
So in guerrilla tactics, some of the best ways that you're going to do it, and I'll kind of use some of the towns and villages I see around here as an example, and say an occupying force is set up in a town. Well, the first thing I would start doing is start trying to secure key terrain. Doing it covertly as long as I can before I'd have to go over it. And from there, establishing positions in that key terrain, then you can start using reconnaissance. What are they doing? Are they establishing any routines? Do we know preferred routes? And then from there, you can start setting up those ambushes. You can start hitting them where it hurts. Say you know when and where they're going to have a resupply convoy come through. You can hit that. Are they doing a security patrol? Are you going to want to avoid that, or are you going to want to hit that? And eventually, you're going to start whittling them away, where their will to fight is going to disappear. Their ability to fight is going to start disappearing, as they're not going to be getting those resupplies and whatnot. And it's going to give you time to start building up that manpower slowly over time to finally take that town. And then once you have a firm hold on that town, that's when you can either start building it up, or some guerrilla tactics in the past, they'll just abandon the town, wait for that group to come back, and that local populace hates that there's even any military presence there, and they're going to direct that anger towards the current force that's there, which is going to make their life even harder.
So in a sense, you could say that they are still, their ultimate goal is to eventually drive out the occupying force through force, but they have to be very careful about how they go about it, because if they just do it, confront straight head on, they're going to lose. They need time to build up the manpower and the relationships and all the different things so that they can set their motion in place. So I think maybe where it differs from an insurgency is an insurgency, they're kind of trying to tire the enemy and make their resolve kind of go down to the point where they just leave. And whereas a guerrilla is like, okay, we want to actually drive them out and control this area. But they can't just do it off the rip. It takes a lot of work, right? Because they're outgunned and outmanned.
Exactly. And with an insurgency and a guerrilla force, you might have that support from the local civilian population. The only big difference that I would see is that in a guerrilla force, there's a chance that civilian population would absolutely direct its anger towards you, because you're also here causing problems as well. Whereas an insurgency, you might not be too worried about the civilian population because you're using them as concealment, essentially.
Yeah, and also the insurgent might be viewed as like, hey, you're just my neighbor that I know, right? So go get him, right? If he finds out, your neighbor finds out, whatever. Whereas in a guerrilla force, it's like, oh, there's a bunch of dudes marching around and wearing camouflage. I don't know if I like this, right? So yeah, that makes total sense. But I guess as we close, the biggest thing that you should probably take away is whatever you have, you need to train in it. Whether you have just a JanSport and a Glock 19, or you've got, you know, a full $10,000 type, you know, loadout with a Cry airframe, and you've got, you know, all the latest and greatest stuff. Whatever you have, you should train in it and you should practice, because you don't want to be caught unprepared. So again, this video is kind of just to give you a broad overview of some of the different directions you can go with your kit. We're probably going to do a few more things like this to kind of give you a little bit more idea of some of the different disciplines and some of the different areas that you could head. Thanks for watching and have a great day.